Welcome back to JA Global Marketplace Session 5. Today's activity is called World of Words, and it's really going to get the students to think about how much technology has really improved the productivity of what we do on a daily basis. So the first thing you want to do is recognize the materials that you need for today, which is the banner that shows the manuscript, as well as the student workbooks and the table tents once again. When you jump into the introduction, you are going to notice a little icebreaker activity, and this activity really allows you to kind of illustrate to the students how technology has really been enhanced throughout the years. And so basically what I would encourage you to do is to have the students stand up to indicate whether or not they fall into these categories. So you'll notice on these bullet points it asks, first of all, how many of you have used the internet? Well, we know in today's middle school generation, they have all used the internet. So they're going to start with everybody standing up. And as you work through those bullet points, you're going to see fewer and fewer students standing. Now when you get to the end, of course, the students are going to want to be standing. So when you get to the one that talks about if they have any books that were written by hand, you as the volunteer need to make the decision whether or not you want to allow journals to be included. Some people have journals from great-grandparents or grandparents that they take a lot of personal pride in, and they know that that's a family heirloom, and so they may want to include that, and you can decide if you want to accept it. But basically what we're showing them is that productivity has really increased and has really led us to where we are today with technology. So we want them to think back. We want them to travel back to the 1300s, and we really want them to think about what it would be like if we didn't have printable manuscripts, etc. And so we want them to think about what it would be like if they were a scribe back in the old days. And so you're going to notice that there are a lot of prompting conversations that you can have with the students. The first thing is to talk about this manuscript poster, and you'll notice on the in the book and on the side margins it talks a little bit about specifically about what this manuscript is made up of, and so it's kind of fun to talk to the students a little bit about that as an example of a real manuscript that existed. Then it's going to have you talk a little bit about the role of a scribe and what the job description of a scribe would be. Each line of text had to be straight, every letter had to be written in a very exact style and size, and the final book could have no mistakes. And so we really want them to see, how many of you guys think that that sounds like a job you're going to want to sign up for? And you might have some artistic students that actually think that that would be a lot of fun, and they might be really good at it. Then you can lead into the discussion about Johann Gutenberg and the importance of him inventing the movable type back in 1455. The first book in Europe from the printing press was the Gutenberg Bible, and it changed the world thereafter. And so there's a lot of script and a lot of quotes that you can share with the students to get them thinking about how it was back in the day. I always like to read the paragraph that's in italics, and it says this: in 1455, all Europe's printed books could have been carried in a single wagon. All of the books. And I always think about them. I always tell them I'm a farm girl, so I vision a grain wagon. But get them to think about what a wagon is. It's not very big. Even if it were to be a semi-truck that they see driving down the interstate, that's not very big. And so to get them to think about 50 years after, the titles ran to the tens of thousands, the individual volumes to 10 millions, and today the books pour off the press at the rate of 10,000 million, 10 billion a year. So this is just illustrating again the importance and how life-changing that movable print really was. They're going to jump into the main activity, which is to get them to think about what it would be like to be a scribe. Now, the book tells you to actually have the students see how long it takes them to write the whole paragraph, but what we have found is that the students get really, really bored with that, and they lose interest and they get really frustrated. So what we have found works really well is to give the students a choice. Middle schoolers love to choose and feel like they have ownership. So I always ask the students to choose if they want to do this script or if they want to copy this script. Then I tell them I'm going to give you 3 minutes to see how much script you can copy on the bottom. I always tell them it should look like you put the paper on a copy machine and Xerox copied it. That's how perfect it should be. And again, I always emphasize those directions that it needs to be the same style, size, line length, etc. The text must be straight and there are no mistakes allowed. Then I tell them, on your marks, get set, go, and I time about 3 or 4 minutes. You can kind of gauge how focused and how engaged they are in this activity. At time, go ahead and call time and have them look at their work. You're going to have some students who did not get past the opening square. You're going to have some students that have a few words or maybe even a few lines. Again, it's going to really depend upon their attention to detail. One thing I like to do to make this a little bit more fun is I like to actually have the students vote on the best scribe. So what I have them do is I have them work in small groups, and I have each small group decide. They cannot vote for themselves, but they have to vote for who they feel is the best scribe in their group. And then once you have one from each group, you can then again have the class vote on, out of those last 6 people, who is the best scribe from there. If your classroom has technology in which you can project their artwork on the main screen, you can use that. Or you can simply have the students just quickly walk up and down the aisles showing their scribed work. It's just a fun way to get the students to really stop and think about all they have that people in the 1400s didn't have, in the 1300s and prior to that. The second part of the activity is really to challenge the students to think about productivity and to really talk about output and input and how that calculates it. And there's a lot of companies that are specifically centered on productivity goals. There are call centers that they have to average a certain amount of time for each call, etc. And so there's lots of examples that you might be able to have from your industry or other examples that you can share with the students to make that life applicable. One fun thing is to convert it, instead of pages per hour, to do words per minute, since that's what the students did. And sometimes I have them calculate that on their own, and then I talk about the variances of the class of what their productivity was as they move forward in the classroom. That's a great way to kind of bring it down to their level. So I just have them convert words per minute instead of pages per hour as indicated in the book. The last portion is really to challenge the students to think about all of the ways in which technology has enhanced our lives. You can do this a couple different ways. You can just do an open brainstorm and create a web on the board and actually ask the students what types of technology has enhanced our lives to today. That's one option. Or you could actually assign these various technologies to a group of students and ask them how our lives would be different or what the challenges would be in our lives if we didn't have them. Both of those are great options for them to really, again, think about the perspective of whether or not we had these technologies. One thing I always like to end with is to talk a little bit about the postage system, and I ask them how many of them know what a stamp costs. And I talk to them and I ask them what's the last time they wrote a handwritten letter. And I'd like to talk a lot about how technology can really be enhanced, but it also can create some negative things. And for one of those is communication. Texting and Facebook and IMing, all of that is great, but it's also hindered a lot of our face-to-face communication. And I always bring that out. And I always talk about their futures and how someday they're going to have a job interview and they're not going to be able to text that potential employer. They're really going to be face-to-face, and that importance of not losing those personal connections just because we have the convenience of technology as well. Those are some great ideas on how to add some discussion at the end if this activity runs a little bit short. The other thing that it ends with here in the curriculum is just to talk about the natural barrier that exists to slow the information explosion, and that would be language. So a lot of times we know that our inability to communicate across countries sometimes slows that information overload. So common languages are sometimes important, and that's why people learn more than one language as well. So again, their bookmarks that they had received in the beginning of the program showed different languages from some of those definitions, so you might encourage them to pull that out and look at those different writings as well. Again, always take just a few minutes to have a summary and review to wrap up the activity. Enjoy the day!